Cortland Simmons with you here at the CS Racing Report, and like AC/DC, we're back in black, recapping the Louisiana Derby for 2020, run at the Preakness distance of 1 mile and 3/16, a half furlong longer than the typical 9 furlong final preps leading to the Kentucky Derby, to be held on the rescheduled date of September the 5th at Churchill Downs in historic Louisville, Kentucky. And it was won by WELLS BAYOU, who was very, very impressive in this race. He won it by 1.5 lengths over New York Traffic, who was 2 3/4 lengths in front of Modernist, the winner of Division 2 of the Risen Star. Major Fed was in 4th in this race amongst the 14 horses. Final time was 156.47 after fractions of 23.56, 48 flat for the half, 112.42 for the 3/4. So that first fraction at the first quarter of 23.56 sort of set the tempo. He picked it up a little bit on the second one, WELLS BAYOU. The 112.42, it could be argued that perhaps this is where the horse was slowing down. Everybody's hopes were up that he was going to slow down and be caught, and the closers and the stalk and pouncers would close in and swallow him up. The exact opposite happened. He kicked on very, very nicely. He was alert. He led all the way throughout, and he was driven in the stretch. Thought he accelerated pretty nicely. It wasn't something of the dreams of Pegasus or something in that vanguard, but I thought it was a solid performance going this route of ground for the first time. And so Brad Cox has plenty of time to get this horse in fit mode to be even better when we get to the Derby. And we already know he's pretty good at 1 mile and 3/16. But again, there'll be a lot of question marks, him and his front running style, that are going to be posed on him. We'll talk about that in a minute after we talk about some of the other horses that either excelled or disappointed in this Louisiana Derby. The New York Traffic has done very, very well. Savvy Joseph has done a good job. He was well ridden. He got out of there sharply. He stalked very nicely to put himself within the striking distance of the leader. He drifted in the stretch, though. Once he started to make his bid, he did drift and almost got in the way of Modernist, but he was far enough clear to where there wasn't a Stewart's or a rider inquiry. He closed really, really well, though. What was interesting was he did start to put a dent in WELLS BAYOU's lead, and so that's encouraging going a distance of ground if, in fact, this wasn't his peak effort and he goes backwards. He's a horse that you're going to be playing in some of your exotics if you believe that he can mix it up with these other entities that are going to be involved should he make it to the Kentucky Derby. Modernist, I think he ran evenly. I think the race caller hit it on the head. He was one pace throughout in the stretch. He had every opportunity to kick into another one of those supersonic, one of those extra special gears, and he just wasn't able to kick into overdrive and make that dent on the first two. But considering he was coming out of the 14, I thought he overcame it very well. He was able to angle in, got in about the 3.5, 4 path, and then was able to move into the 3, was in 4th place throughout. Seemed to be kind of having to, put a little effort into maintaining that 4th position. 3 wide on the turn, kind of spun his wheels in the stretch, kind of climbed a little bit, just wasn't able to float the way that you want to in the stretch, but he still came on. And I thought he showed that on class alone, he can still get you a check, and that's exactly what he did for Bill Mott. Now I think they'll have to fine-tune him and find out if, number one, they can get a better post position. It could be argued he might not like the fairground surface, but I thought he did well. He won the Risen Star Division 2. He ran, pretty well in here. Wasn't a great effort. It's not one that bettors are going to basically gravitate toward, but I still think he's a horse that could be usable. We'll find out. He'll certainly probably get a prep somewhere in there before the Kentucky Derby, given this lag between the typical date of the Derby, the first Saturday in May and the first Saturday in September. So we're going to see him somewhere, and we're going to find out as to the nature and level of quality, what kind of horse he is. Major Fed, I thought, was impressive in the sense that he trailed throughout. I think they never were intending on being in the first flight, but that's something they're going to have to work on in these added distance races. Got in the 3.5 pace, picked up horses very nicely about 4 furlongs out. The only detriment to his opportunity to finish better or even win it was that he was 7 wide. So they've definitely got to avoid that. Obviously, if you save ground in a route race and then you have to go 4, 5, 6 wide and you've got the horsepower, you can pick up horses and possibly win a race like the Kentucky Derby and any of the other classics. But 7 wide is not going to be something that you really want to roadblock yourself into these classic races. But I thought he finished well considering he did not get the ideal path to success or victory in this race. As for the disappointments. They're many and varied and quite significant, enforceable. He ran hard, but he just wasn't able to make an impact. He wasn't able to make that deficit from the front runners. And a lot of people that are going to still ride this horse are going to say, hey, look, what happens on the front end or what happened here is not going to happen in these other races. There's going to be a meltdown up front, and we'll talk about that. But again, he just didn't quite punch in the way that, everyone thought that he would. But he did run, I thought, a reasonable race. The only hope for him at this point is that these other horses are just not going to be able to handle the added distance, and he's going to be able to make himself serviceable in these big races. But for right now, he's a little bit on the outside. His price is going to definitely go up, but I think people are still going to use him. Again, he lacked that punch, but he ran on, I thought, valiantly to get the 5th spot. Shake Some Action was 6th, but Silver State finished 7th. And like his stablemate, Silver Prospector, in the Rebel Stakes, he got an ideal trip. He was 2 to 3 wide all the way around that oval, and he just had no kick in the stretch. He did try to put the effort in the stretch run, but he just got out-accelerated, and that is a concern. He's been consistent for the most part, but now we're going to find out as we move on down the road if he can get himself back into contention. I will say this, he will be a surprise for bettors because I do think he is going to be pushed aside once you start grouping all these other contenders. But again, he does have the pedigree. Will he have the performance to match that pedigree? It did not happen on Louisiana Derby Day. Royal Act was a horse from California coming in. People have been questioning that Breeders' Cup Juvenile won by Storm the Court over Anna Dior all along, and a lot of people had some big question marks on his performance, finishing second to 1,000 Words in the Robert B. Lewis, given how 1,000 Words did not run well in the San Felipe. So there were some question marks, even though he had the highest equibase speed figure of the 14 starters. I certainly had some, although I did put him on the tail end of a couple of exotics. He was in a good spot in the beginning, 3 wide, but he lost ground. Once we got past the half-mile mark, everybody was outrunning him 4 furlongs out, and when we hit the stretch, he just was nowhere really to be. He tried, but he was just really a non-factor, and that is not something Peter Urton wanted to see. This is the worst. This is almost as bad as this virus that's going around. This is a pretty bad nightmare for him to have to endure, given that Storm the Court's 0 for 2 as the tepid or lukewarm 2-year-old champion of 2019. So Royal Act was far from that. This performance was not royal, and this was an act of disastrous proportions, and he's a horse that you definitely have to toss right now until otherwise noted. There is time, though, out there before the Kentucky Derby, but he disappointed. Portos, all the way down in 14th for trainer Todd Pletcher, showed nothing in this race, and so he's in rehab right now, getting third-degree burn treatment at a local ICU down in New Orleans before leaving and getting checked out to possibly perform and pick out what the plan is going to be in terms of going back to the drawing board for him. But meantime, back to the winner, Wells Bayou. A lot of people are going to question, well, he got an easy pace, and it's not going to be that way in the Kentucky Derby or any of these major preps leading up to it. And it's not going to be the same, and that could be argued. There's a lot of speed horses that could potentially make the starting gate between Authentic, Nadal, Wells Bayou. If Mr. Monomoy comes back, that's a ton of speed. But somebody's going to either have to be cognizant and weary to rate, or everyone's just going to get cooked and roasted on the front end, and it really is going to set up for some of these horses, whether they were also rans or top-level performers in the Derby or the Preakness or the Belmont. I think the riders on a lot of these horses are smarter than that, and I think Wells Bayou is a horse that could certainly have a curve for improvement. So I'm not buying into this any more than people saying, well, Maximum Security got an easy lead in the Florida Derby. When you've got gears, you've got potential, and you've got an opportunity to be a factor in this race. Again, it'll be interesting to see where Wells Bayou rates in terms of his buyer speed figure and how people will place him as a Derby contender. But I think Brad Cox is certainly happy with the way this horse performed. Great performance by him in winning this 2020 Louisiana Derby by 1 1/2 lengths in 156.47 over the Safi Joseph Jr. trained New York Traffic, who finished second. 2 3/4 lengths in front of Modernist, trained by Bill Mott, with Major Fed, named after tennis legend Roger Federer, in fourth. Wells Bayou, trained by Brad Cox, wins the 2020 Louisiana Derby.